All right, today we're jumping into a book that honestly has probably changed more people's thinking about money than any other, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And at its core, it's not really a how-to guide, it's all about a massive shift in mindset. It's told through the eyes of Kiyosaki, who had two very different father figures. There was his poor dad, his actual father, super smart, highly educated, but always struggling with money. And then there was his rich dad, his best friend's father, who dropped out in the 8th grade but ended up a multimillionaire.
And right out of the gate, Kiyosaki just lays it all out there with these two totally opposite worldviews. You've got his poor dad saying, "The love of money is the root of all evil." A classic, right? But then Rich Dad comes in and just flips it completely on its head. He says, no, the lack of money is the root of all evil. And that one simple, powerful contrast, that's the bedrock for the entire book.
And you can totally see how these deep-seated beliefs trickle down into their everyday thinking. So Poor Dad's go-to phrase was, "I can't afford it." And that's just a full stop, right? It's a statement that shuts your brain down. But Rich Dad, he would ask, "Okay, how can I afford it?" It's a question. It forces your brain to start working, to look for solutions. See the difference? It's not really about the money itself. It's about a mindset of limitation versus a mindset of possibility. And that one little shift is what set them on completely different financial paths.
Okay, so how did Kiyosaki actually start learning all this stuff? Well, it wasn't in a classroom. It all started with a pretty terrible, super low-paying job that led him to his very first big lesson from Rich Dad. The rich do not work for money.
You know, Rich Dad's first lesson wasn't some big speech. It was a real-life experience. He actually had a young Kiyosaki work for him for just 10 cents an hour, dusting cans in a shop. I mean, can you imagine? Of course, Kiyosaki got fed up and wanted to quit. And that's when Rich Dad sat him down and explained that feeling, that frustration, that anger about the low pay, that was life pushing him. He said most people just react emotionally. They blame their boss, they demand a raise, they quit, but they never stop to think about what the push is trying to teach them.
And this is what he famously called the rat race. Think about it. It's a pattern that's driven by two really powerful emotions. First up is fear. The fear of not being able to pay your bills, that fear is what gets you up in the morning and sends you to a job. But then you get the paycheck. And what happens next? Greed, or let's just call it desire, kicks in. You start thinking about all the cool stuff you can buy. So you spend the money, which of course leaves you needing more money, which brings you right back to that fear. Get up, go to work, pay bills. It's a trap, and it just repeats over and over again.
So here's the big takeaway. The only way out of the rat race isn't to run faster. It's to stop running altogether. You have to change the game. Instead of you working for money, the whole goal is to get your money to start working for you. Sounds great, right? But how on earth do you actually do that?
Well, that brings us to what might be the single most important rule in the entire book. Seriously, this is the foundation that everything else is built on.
See, Rich Dad's whole theory was that people struggle with money for one simple reason. They don't know the difference between an asset and a liability. So we just tossed out all the complicated accountant-speak definitions and boiled it down to something anyone could understand. It's all about which way the money is flowing. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. That's it. That's the whole rule.
And you can see this play out so clearly in how different people manage their cash. For someone who's poor, money comes in as income and poof, it goes right back out as expenses. Nothing's left. Now the middle class, their income comes in, but they use it to buy liabilities. You know, a car payment, a mortgage, credit card debt. And those liabilities create even more expenses, which keeps them stuck. But look at the rich. They play a totally different game. Their income comes in, and the first thing they do is buy assets. Those assets then create more income for them, and that income pays for their expenses. Their main focus isn't on earning more from their job, it's on building that asset column.
And here is the absolute crux of the problem. The poor and middle class are constantly buying liabilities that they think are assets. They're buying things that drain their bank account every single month. So what Rich Dad called financial literacy wasn't about fancy math. It was simply the ability to read the story that the numbers are telling you, to look at something and know for sure which way it's going to make the cash flow.
Which naturally leads us to the book's most famous and probably most controversial idea. It's a question that challenges the very foundation of the American dream. So, is your house really an asset?
Well, if we stick to Rich Dad's super simple definition, the answer is a big, fat no. I mean, think about it. Does your primary home put money in your pocket each month? Nope. In fact, it does the exact opposite. Every single month, cash flows out for the mortgage, for property taxes, for insurance, for maintenance, the list goes on. Now, the book isn't saying you shouldn't own a home. The point is to just be honest about what it is. It's a liability. And it's not the investment that's going to set you free financially. All right, so that brings us to the third big lesson. If the goal is to build up that asset column, what exactly are we supposed to be building? This is where Rich Dad makes a really important distinction between your profession and your business. Kiyosaki tells this great story about Ray Kroc, the guy who founded McDonald's. He was giving a talk to a bunch of MBA students, and he asked them, "What business am I in?" And of course, they all said, "Hamburgers." And he just laughed and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am not in the hamburger business. My business is real estate." See, he knew that the product was burgers, but the real business, the real asset, was the incredibly valuable real estate that every single McDonald's restaurant sat on. And that just makes it crystal clear, doesn't it? Your profession is what you do to earn a paycheck. That's your job. It shows up on your income statement. A doctor sees patients, a mechanic fixes cars. But your business, that's your asset column. That's the stuff you own that makes money for you. Things like stocks, bonds, rental properties, maybe even a patent. Your business is what keeps working even when you stop. So the big question is, how do you even start this? And the advice is actually super practical. You do not go and quit your day job. Absolutely not. You keep your job because that pays the bills. But you start being really intentional with your income. You stop buying liabilities and you start buying real assets. Little by little, you focus on growing that asset column. Your mindset literally shifts from, how do I get a promotion, to how do I buy my next asset? When you boil it all down, everything we've discussed so far comes down to one thing: making a choice. A conscious choice to go against the grain, to break away from what everyone else is doing. And that means you have to overcome some really powerful forces, mostly inside your own head. Because here's a really core idea from the book. Your financial situation is almost always a mirror of what's going on inside you. Kiyosaki argues that it's not the government or the economy or your boss that holds you back. It's your own fear. The fear of taking a risk, the fear of what other people will think, and your own ignorance about how money actually works. Those are the real traps. And Kiyosaki perfectly captures this idea with that famous poem from Robert Frost. You know the one, "Two roads diverged in a wood"? His poor dad was on that well-traveled road. Get good grades, find a safe, secure job, and just play it safe. But his rich dad showed him the other path, the one less traveled. It was a path that meant you had to learn to manage risk, you had to question everything, and you had to make your financial education a priority. And choosing that second path, well, that's what made all the difference. And so, we're going to leave you with the exact same question that this entire book is built around. I want you to really think about your own life. What story is your money telling?
Are you working for your money, or is your money working for you?